All right, now it's time to start moving everything out from just the frequency dimension and into the stereo field. Putting things left, putting things right, leaving things in the center, or as we'll see, even pushing things out to the side or pulling them into the middle. So there are many ways that we can control where a sound sits within the stereo field. But the most common way, and the way that you're probably already doing it, is by using the pan knob on any given track. So if I crack open my drums group here, I come into the rim sound. Let's solo this out, get to a spot where that's playing. Play for me. There we go. We can pan it left by turning down the volume on the right channel. We can actually see this reflected in the metering itself, that currently there's no sound going to that right channel, and making it sound as if it's coming from the left speaker. Now if I pan this back to the right, we'll do the opposite, turning the volume down on the left and leaving it alone in the right. Now, depending upon the environment that you're listening in, if you're listening on headphones, this will sound really strange because there's no sound of the snare arriving at your left ear. But if you're listening to this on speakers, you might actually still be hearing this rim sound arriving at both of your ears, but it'll only be coming from the right speaker. So this kind of discrepancy between the way things sound in speakers versus the way things sound in headphones is what leads me to position things in the left and right fields using a few other techniques rather than just volume, because often I want to preserve the naturalness of the listening environment that we have when we have speakers in a room, as opposed to the unnaturalness that we have with headphones or earbuds in our ears, that there is no mixture of air. The sound isn't filling the space, but it's only going directly from the speaker to my ear. So the way we can do this is by not using just straight up volume, but by using other parameters that allow us to identify a sound's location within space. And that first parameter is time. So if we go into our audio effects here, grab the simple delay and drag and drop it onto that rim track, I can switch this out of being in synchronized mode. So if I just leave this playing now, it's just creating rhythmic echoing backs of my rim sound. But if I switch it out of sync mode into milliseconds mode, and I push it up to being fully wet, because I don't want to hear any of the original signal, I only want to hear the delayed signal, and then bring down the time of delay to both channels of being the lowest possible that I can set it to, in this case 1 millisecond. Now I can control how long it takes for this snare sound to arrive at either the left or the right channel. So if we get this playing again, and I start to decrease or increase the time it takes to arrive at the right channel, there you can already hear, if you've got headphones in, there's been a significant shift in the sound, and now it sounds like it's on the left-hand side. You can make this even more dramatic by increasing that delay time. But at some point we'll arrive at the threshold where it's no longer a single event that's positioned on one side of our body, but there, if you're wearing headphones, you can hear this is starting to become two events. And then when we go way up, now we're definitely at two events there. So there is a threshold between just pushing it one side or the other and actually separating it out to separate events. And I find that that's somewhere between 10 to 20 milliseconds that starts to happen for me. So if we bring this back down, let's just subtly position this rim sound to one side. We could switch this by saying, let's actually say it's on the right-hand side, so let's delay the time it takes to get to the left-hand side. Now we've accomplished the opposite. That rim sound is now on the right-hand side of our body because we delayed the left-hand side. So this is one technique that we can use time to control which side the sound appears to be coming from. The second technique is similar to why the sunset is red. So if you've ever wondered why the sunset is red, it's because light, like sound, has different frequencies or different bands of frequencies, ranging from blue, which is really high frequency light, down to red, which is really low frequency light. And the reason that the sunset is red is because the sun is further away from us and has to pass through more atmosphere in order for that light to arrive at us. And those higher blue frequencies, being smaller and high frequency, reflect off of the particles in the atmosphere, while the lower frequencies of the red spectrum just pass right on through. They're less responsive and less reflective against those particles in space, and so the sunset is red. And this is the same reason that if you've ever been to a dance club and you walk up to the outside door and you're waiting in line to get in, and all you hear coming out from the interior is just and all of a sudden that door opens up and all the high frequencies come screaming out like so, and all of a sudden you're excited and ready to run in. That is because of the same thing of the sunset being red, is that audio waves or sound frequencies, the higher they are, the more responsive or reflective they are to objects within space. So using that knowledge, we can then say or surmise that if I want to position a sound as being on one side of my body or the other side of my body, all I have to do is dampen or tone down the amount of high frequencies arriving at the other side, as if they were reflecting off of my head and less information or less high frequency content was arriving at the opposite side. So to do that, let's get rid of this simple delay. Let's go back and grab that same tool, the EQ8, drag and drop it onto our rim track. Most EQs, not all EQs, will have several different modes that you can switch them between. The mode that we had been using in the previous dimension there of putting everything in its own frequency was the stereo mode, and that we were processing both the left and the right channels with the same EQ shape. But if we look at the right-hand side of the EQ8 here, we can flip it from being in stereo mode to a couple other modes. We have left, right, and mid-side. We'll look at the mid-side in a second. But if we look at the left-right, now we actually have two EQs inside of this single EQ8, one that we can apply to the left channel and the other that we can apply to the right channel. So if I want to suggest that this rim sound is on the left side of my body, I might come into the right channel EQ using a high shelving EQ here and tone down the amount of high frequencies that are arriving at my right ear. And now we've got a sound that is subtly pushed to the left-hand side. So if we look at our meters, we can see that this is not too dissimilar from using that pan knob to push it to the left-hand side, because it's actually turned down the volume a little bit in the right channel, but it's turned down a specific portion or part of that sound, and that is the high frequencies, preserving a much more natural pushing of this sound to one side or the other side of the body. So now we can couple all three of these techniques. We could use time, go back and grab our simple delay, switch it into time-based mode, go fully wet so we're only hearing that delayed signal, and I've already attenuated the high frequencies on the right-hand side, so let's also delay the time it takes to get to the right-hand side. And then let's also use just a little bit of volume here. And now I've got a snare sound or a rim sound that's pushed really far left, but in a natural way that whether or not I'm listening to this on headphones or listening to this through speakers, it's going to sound like a really natural snare drum sound. So now we can use this information to go through and control or position all of the sounds within our mix within this stereo field. We don't have to use all three techniques with every single sound, but we should go through and consciously decide, all right, let's position this one here and push this one there. Just like the EQ or the frequency dimension, we're thinking about trying to give everything its own space. Now, if we had trouble with any overlap, like in the brass sounds in the EQ section, the panning section or the panning dimension can help us alleviate that by taking two sounds that were overlapping in the first dimension and pushing them into their own discrete spaces within the second dimension. Now, if we can't accomplish this, it's a really complicated mix and everything is starting to still overlap or continuing to overlap in the panorama, we still have the final dimension of depth, which will allow us to open that up even more. So even the most complexes of mix can still be clear through these three dimensions. So let's keep working through this, and I'll point out some other things as we go along. The first thing I should talk about, or is kind of draw connections from, is that same thing of thinking about how high frequencies are more responsive to space and low frequencies less responsive to space. What we mean by this, or what we need to know about this, is that the lower the frequency is, the expectation is that it will be more of a mono signal, or that sound will be arriving at both the left and the right channels equally. So if we look at this kick drum, solo this out, and I were just to pan this to the left, it sounds really strange to hear just that kick drum in the left-hand side. We're really accustomed to that coming down the middle, and that is because those low frequencies are more kind of pervasive and less reflective, and so we're going to hear them in both channels equally. Now we could go through and we could mess with some of the higher frequencies in this, so that we could bring in an EQ8 and flip it into left-right mode and leave the low frequencies untouched, but come in and do a little bit of subtle kind of opening up of the stereo field here. And do something like that to get a little bit wider sound out of our kick drum. But I think that's a little bit bizarre, and in fact I would probably prefer to see kind of the opposite here that we've gone in and done. Rather than boosting those areas, let's reduce those areas and get the same effect without changing all of our gain staging or balancing of the tracks here. So something more along those lines now. Subtle, but a little bit wider sound there. But we should always leave those low frequencies alone. So that means elements within our brass that are getting into the lower frequencies, like this matrix brass over here, or elements of our bass sound over here, that should remain pretty close to the middle or the center, especially in those lower frequencies. But as we get up higher in frequencies in terms of the sound, we can get a little bit more expressive with how that fits into the stereo image. All right, so I'm just going to kind of work through all these sounds. Let's see, let's leave that kick drum dead center in the middle. Let's work through the rest. We've already pushed my rim sound out to the right hand side, so let's, or I'm sorry, the left side. Yeah, the left side. So let's just take and do the opposite with our snare sound. Then with our claps, let's just use volume in this case. So there's our drums pushed out into the stereo field. Let's move on to our brass here. Let's start with the trombones. Let's take and use the EQ8 here to just subtly push this one to the left hand side. We'll do kind of a similar thing with our claps. So reduce the highs in the right. And let's do the opposite with the Rapman. And now I'm going to do a new technique here with this matrix brass here. Of that, I'm going to use the same EQ8, but instead of using it in the stereo or the left-right mode, I'm going to put it into the final mode there, the MS, which stands for mid and side. And this allows us to EQ what's coming down the center of the mix separately from what's coming down the sides of the mix. So kind of the hard panned left or hard panned right sounds versus the monophonic sound. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to limit or kind of pull this matrix brass sound to being much more in the center, which is going to emphasize the fact that the trombone and the Rapman brass are pushed a little bit left and right. So if I switch out of the M for mid and into the side mode, I can grab a similar high shelving EQ. Let's turn off all the other bands, grab band 7, which is already set to a high shelving EQ, solo this out. Actually, let's first off hear what this sounds like. So let's go to the mid side, the mid, and let's just sweep out all the mids. So you can hear it kind of thins out the sound by removing all that mid spectrum. Oppositely, if I go to the side and I sweep out all the sides, now it sounds like it's only in the center of the mix. Very thin, narrow sound. So I want to push this one just slightly more to the middle by pulling out some of the high frequencies from the sides. And then let's also pull out the low frequencies from the sides. And now as a total mix, and now let's treat all of these, since we've got them grouped, and I've pushed this one to the middle, this one to the right, this one to the left. Let's take all of these and let's open up some space in the middle of our mix for the rest of these elements to fit. That I want to be able to put this guitar in the middle, I want to be able to put this bass in the middle, I want this lead to be able to sit in the middle, and so I need to make some space by removing the brass sound from the middle of the mix. So I'm going to do the same thing, but on the group track of this of my brass here. Switch this EQ8 into mid-side mode, get it playing, and then let's just pull out some of the low frequency, actually the high frequency I should say, from the middle sound. And rather than using a high pass, let's use high shelving, so it's a little bit less aggressive. So on its own, that sounds a little bit thinner, but as soon as we start to add in everything else, hacking out that upper space will really allow some other elements to fit into that spot. So now let's move on to the guitar sound. Let's start by pushing this just a little bit to the left-hand side. Use a little bit of EQ8 here. Let's put this into mid-side, and let's push this back into the middle of the mix. Let's use a little pan there. Now against our brass. Let's go back and A/B it without that mid-side EQ on the brass group track there to see how that causes some overlap between my guitar that's currently sitting pretty close to just the middle of the mix, pushed a little bit left just to add some interest. And so if I pull out this EQ8 here that's reducing the highs in the mid portion of the brass sound, how that causes more overlap between the brass and the guitar. So it's really subtle that the brass just feels fuller when we've got that turned off, but also when I turn it back on, all of a sudden that guitar just lifts a little bit more out of the mix, and it's positioned more as the focal point of what's happening at this moment. So I think overall that's going to be nice. I think this brass is going to regain some of its width and warmth as soon as we move into the final dimension of depth. So for now I'm going to leave this, and I might tweak it as we progress, but Let's keep moving forward. Let's do this bass sound. The bass, we know, has a lot of low frequency content, and we know that low frequency should be in the middle of the mix. So let's bring in an EQ8, switch it into mid-side, and let's pull out all of the low frequencies from the side of this bass. So let's solo this out. And then let's also reduce some of the highs just a little bit. Something like that. Nice. Then the lead sounds, let's push the flutes a little bit left using some simple delay. And some EQ. Then do the opposite with the Super JP brass. And then let's use on that group track, let's pull this back to being a little bit more in the middle by using some mid-side, reducing some of the side contents of that. And then let's just push the overall thing just a little bit right to contrast against the guitar that we've got just a little bit left. So now when you bring both those in, let's go a little bit harder left with the guitar. And bringing everything back in. All right, so things are starting to have a little bit more of their own space. I think I'll probably keep going through along these same lines and just doing a little bit more careful tweaking of making sure that things are really as separate or positioned where I want them to be. And I'm listening to that bass sound. It's a little bit too driving, that low frequency, so I might have to jump back to my EQ8 there and tone that down a little bit. Or perhaps that's just something I'll handle when I move on to EQing this as a total track at the end of this mixing adventure. So let's call that good for now, and let's move on to the final dimension.